Hey everyone, Chaps here, and today I'm going to show you how I made these resin coasters. In today's video, part 1, I'm going to show you how I got to this step right here. Basically how I took a piece of wood, designed the lake that I wanted on it, and cut out the very specific lake. In tomorrow's video, I'm going to talk about the resin pouring and the post-processing. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss that. As a quick message up front, I messed up. I made a rookie mistake and I didn't record enough footage here. I took a bunch of pictures along the way, but this is actually the first video that I'm recording a DIY project for. I've posted other DIY projects on the channel, but this one, being this is for a Christmas present, was recorded in early November and it's not being released until later. So, rookie mistake, didn't record enough. I made up for it in part 2, and if you check any of the other videos on our channel, you'll see that I definitely am recording a lot of footage now. So I do apologize, and hopefully things improve in the future. Now, I've always loved resin tables, but they're large, they're expensive. Epoxy's really expensive, so the table's really expensive. And if you mess something up, well, that's a lot of money right out the window. And also, I don't have a CNC machine, so it would be really hard to route out the shape that I want for a lake. So I thought, let's start small. And what better way to start small than to make some coasters? I may eventually make a nice tabletop for my console table with this same design probably, but you know what? I'm going to start small. Many people use a live edge piece of wood or just carve out a random river or lake. Well, of course I needed to make things harder on myself. Seneca Lake in New York has always been a special place to me and my family. Because of this, I really wanted to make a river, or in this case a lake, that matched Seneca Lake. This actually makes things much more complicated. I don't have a CNC machine. How am I going to get this cut out of a piece of wood? First, I took the dimensions of the lake and gave it a bit of wiggle room. I found that if I take a 6.5 mile by 39 mile section, I can scale it down to a 4-inch by 24-inch board, and that would cut into 6 coasters, each at 4 inches by 4 inches. So I've got the scale down, but again, how do I get this cut out of a board? Well, my first thought was actually to 3D print a template. I found this awesome site that creates a 3D STL file of a portion of a map based on some topographical data that's available online. By downloading this file and loading it into my slicer, I should be able to figure out where the lake is. Due to the shores being relatively flat in some areas, it was actually sort of difficult to slice properly. But I quickly found that by stretching the Z-axis, I could slice right through the shoreline, remove the bottom, scale it down to the right size, cut off the excess material at the top, and bam, I've got an outline of the lake. Unfortunately, this wasn't quite accurate enough at representing some of the shorelines. My family has spent a considerable amount of time at Peach Orchard Point, and sadly, this topo map just isn't showing it too well. But let's just go back to basics. Open up Google Map, screenshot the area, magic wand out the water, and repeat going down the lake. We line up all these images, and bam, I've got a much more accurate lake profile. I made sure that I zoomed in and got this as accurate as possible, just in case I do decide to do a larger scale table in the future. I can now print this in 3 to 4 parts with dovetail connections between them so that they fit in like a puzzle. I can then put this on the wood and draw out my lines. Alternatively, I could offset the lines a little bit and make a guide so that I could just follow along with my router. And you know what? Why not both? I took my image of the lake and converted it to an SVG file. This can be read into Fusion 360 so that I can make some modifications for 3D printing. Once it was scaled properly, I can make some construction lines showing the coaster outline, basically the part that I care about. And next I subdivide it into 4 sections based on my printer's size limitations. To connect the sections once they're printed, and, keep them aligned with each other, I put in some rough dovetails. When I print, I need to make sure that I put about a 0.1mm offset on the dovetail. If I don't do this, it will be too tight and I'll need to sand it in order for it to fit. If I make it too high, like a 0.5 mm, then it will be too loose. I found 0.1mm to be perfect. Now let's go ahead and print this stuff. So here we go. I've got the lake, and I've got the shore. And most importantly, I've got the wood. I opted for a 3/4 inch piece of red oak. First, I'm going to tape the lake down to the wood. Now we'll just do a quick trace of where it should be. Okay, now let's attach the router template. I'm actually going to try out a new technique that I've seen recommended online. Instead of clamps or double-sided tape, I'm going to try out this masking tape and super glue method. And again, I apologize for not recording this part. I'll link to another video down below in which someone else explains it in more detail. Basically, you put the masking tape both on top of the wood and the bottom of the guide. Then you just super glue the 2 pieces of tape together. It's essentially a cheap DIY version of double-sided tape. With all this in place, it was time to start routing. To utilize this offset, I need an inlay bushing for my router. I actually picked this setup from Harbor Freight for $15. I'm going to be using this 3/8 inch bushing, which has a 5/16 inch inner diameter. Using a 1/4 inch router bit will mean a 1/16 offset between the bushing OD and the bits OD. By following along a template, I am limited by this 3/8 inch bushing, but the result should get me close enough. To get started, I used a plunge base. I just used this to carve out a small starting space in the middle of the lake. I prefer to use my fixed base router so that I can focus on lateral movement and won't need to worry so much about the plunge depth. For those curious, I'm using a 1/4 inch spiral downcut bit. I picked a downcut blade because it should make for a crisper line on the surface compared to an upcut bit. On the downside, this downcut bit pushes the sawdust downwards. Being I'm not going all the way through the board, there's not really much room for the dust to go, especially at the beginning. Perhaps a compression bit would have been better here. Okay, so I got started and it was creating a ton of sawdust, as expected, but it also seemed like I was being a bit too aggressive. So I just reduced the height a bit and took off between a 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch rather than the full 1/2 inch. Once that pass was done, I went back to take off the remainder. Something important that I want to mention here is how I mentioned that I'm not cutting all the way through the wood. Earlier I discussed how I made things harder on myself by cutting out a specific lake design and not just following a live edge. I did, however, make things much easier by not cutting all the way through. This becomes more apparent in the next video when the resin pouring starts. Now you can see the results of the 3/8 inch bushing. I'm clearly missing some of the finer detail, but you know what? I think it's good enough. I have a 1/8 inch downcut bit that I was going to try, but that thing needs a smaller bushing. And I have a smaller bushing, but with it being a 5/16 bushing, it actually won't help us out at all. So now my only option is to freehand it, but I don't want to risk messing this up for some tiny details that nobody's going to notice. So let's go ahead and rip off this template. Let's see if it's as easy as it's supposed to be. And yeah, wow, that worked out really well. Here's another look at what the final cutout looks like. I've got a decent amount of research to do now because, as I said earlier, I've never done a resin pour before. In order to see that, and the final post-processing, tune into tomorrow's video. In the meantime, if you found this helpful, or if you enjoyed the content, please consider dropping it a like. If you have any questions about the tools or processes used, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or down below in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow.